D.C. region and countries all across the globe, now comes the grieving after the initial shock.
I was watching like all night, so I probably look tired, but and then when you find out, you know some of the people on the plane, is even a bigger blow.
Live look right now at the Potomac River here in the Washington area. Sunset after a days-long recovery mission. Hello, good evening. Welcome to a Washington that is like the rest of the country tonight, grieving. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. Tonight for the government, now come the questions. How did a Black Hawk helicopter crash with an American Airlines flight? 67 people are presumed dead, and so far, not many answers.
The question was, is there been human error or mechanical failure? We don't know what we know just yet.
We are starting to learn a little bit more about the lives lost. They include world-class figure skaters who had been together in Wichita. Russia says some of its top skaters are part of the group. We are also learning of a student from Wichita who was among the dead on that plane heading back to school. So far, more than 24 bodies have been recovered from American Airlines Flight 5342 and one from the Black Hawk helicopter. At the White House today, President Trump, surrounded by his vice president, defense secretary, and transportation secretary. The president suggesting the time to ask hard questions is now, immediately questioning past DEI policies.
We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent.
Just down the road from the unthinkable tragedy, the president's cabinet in the spotlight today. His nominations to run the FBI, Kash Patel, National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, began their confirmation hearings. Day 2 for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as well. How they were challenged later this hour. But first tonight and throughout this hour, our coverage continues right here on NewsNation on the midair collision at Reagan National Airport. Kelly Meyer on how the president responded today. The former head of the FAA, Billy Nolan, joins me live as well. But we begin tonight with our Brian Enton at DCA. Brian?
Yeah, Blake, it's eerie out here tonight. It's quiet, it's dark. There was a lot of activity throughout the day. I'll step out of the way and show you. You can barely see it now because there's just one boat that's still out there, but you can see where that flashing blue light is in the distance as we zoom in here. That is the site of the wreckage of this jet. It is right below that boat. Throughout the day, they were going back and forth, transferring bodies back to shore. Tonight it is very, very quiet. And the Black Hawk helicopter, by the way, is probably just 300 yards or so away. It appears that it's upside down, but much of it is now sticking out of the water. Just an awful situation. A lot of questions tonight, Blake, about the air traffic controllers. The New York Times reporting that the air traffic control tower may have been understaffed last night, that normally there are two controllers because there's so much air traffic in this area. There's one controller that specifically handles helicopters, and there's one controller that specifically handles airplanes, and they make sure that they don't come into the same area. Well, according to the Times, there was only one controller working last night trying to do both jobs. We've obtained some of the air traffic control audio from right during the crash. Take a listen to this.
Crash, crash, crash. This is alert 3. 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 2 helicopters. Well, helicopter CRJ approaching runway 33.
It was probably out in the middle of the river. I just saw a fireball and then it was just gone.
The NTSB today, Blake, not saying much in terms of a cause, saying that it's all under investigation, but President Trump and also the Secretary of Defense quick to point fingers at not only the controller, but also the helicopter pilot, saying that it appears that the pilots of the American Airlines jet were doing the right thing coming in for the landing on Highway 33. The big question is why the helicopter didn't see them, why they flew right into them, and why the controller didn't warn them. Blake,
Brian Enton live for us tonight at Reagan National. Brian, thank you. So President Trump expressed his condolences and held a moment of silence for the victims and their families earlier today at the White House. After that, the president and members of his cabinet spoke to reporters about what they knew about the accident. The commander-in-chief didn't have a firm answer this morning, but did suggest, as you heard Brian say there, the Black Hawk helicopter caused the crash. And he used the moment to challenge DEI policies, which has become a staple of his new administration.
The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so.
Kelly Meyer was in the room with the president today and joins us live tonight at the White House. Kelly?
Yeah, and that was the first out of 2 times that we saw President Donald Trump today. We saw him another time just about an hour ago inside the Oval Office as he was signing executive actions. His comments in the Oval a short time after that briefing, it seemed a bit more toned down on the DEI language that you were just talking about. But when we were in the briefing room earlier today, that's where he was slamming the Obama and Biden administrations for focusing on diversifying federal agencies and departments. And he basically said it resulted in a less skilled and prepared federal workforce, seeming to tie it to the crash. But then tonight in the Oval Office, he said he wasn't sure it had to do with the crash, while at the same time putting his pen to paper on a memorandum ordering, quote, competence over DEI.
Incompetence might have played a role. We'll let you know that. But we want the most competent people. We don't care what race they are. We want the most competent people, especially in those positions. And, you're talking about extremely complex things. And if they don't have a great brain, a great power of the brain, they're not going to be very good at what they do, and bad things will happen.
And Blake, he also continues to say and express questions around why the helicopter was at that elevation. I'm also told that President Trump will meet with the victims' families at, quote, the appropriate time, a senior administration official tells me. And the Trump administration also setting up a family crisis center in Bethesda, Maryland, I'm told, for the victims' families to come together. Blake.
Kelly Meyer, live tonight at the White House. Kelly, thank you. So the accident also now highlighting the challenges the Federal Aviation Administration has been trying to deal with for months, really years. The FAA and airports across the country have been dealing with air traffic controller shortages, an essential role to ensuring that planes take off and safely land. At the White House, the president announced a new temporary head to lead the FAA, and he assured Americans it's safe to fly.
Flying is very safe. We have the safest flying anywhere in the world, and we'll keep it that way.
Joining me now is Billy Nolan. He is the former FAA administrator in the Biden administration. Billy, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Nice to have you in on this evening. The president there assuring the public that it is safe to fly. Obviously, yes. We think about this incident, the families, the just unspeakable horror that they must be going through.
Yeah.
You have Americans also tonight all across the country questioning the safety of flying. What would you tell them?
Well, I started by saying 3 things. Number 1 is to express my sympathy for this really tragic loss. I spent 26 and a half years with American Airlines, so my heart really bleeds for American, for PSA. And we are in that phase of this operation that we went from a response and a recovery in the hopes that there might be survivors. And this has now progressed into a recovery of the victims' bodies. So now that phase, once you get through that phase, and we know today that it was handed off by Mayor Bauer to the National Transportation Safety Board with Chair Hamidi and her team. That team is an exceptional team, one of the best in the world, if not the best, right? So that's number 2. So we want to, there's a lot of speculation that we've heard. We're about 18 hours post-accident into this, coming up toward the, 24 hours here, is to let the investigation run its course. And in due time, and I think sooner rather than later, those answers will start to be revealed.
The New York Times is reporting that it was, quote unquote, not normal in the air traffic control center that night. There have been staffing shortages with air traffic controllers for years now, and the Congress has tried to remedy that. If that is indeed the case, Why do you think that would have been the case last night, and how big of a failure would it have been in that moment?
I don't have enough information to say that that was the case last night, but what I will tell you, that when you talk to the airlines, when you talk to CEOs, one of the things they want to see is that we've got good staffing there. Certainly is something I worked on during my time as acting FAA administrator, is something I think is something every person who sat in the chairs worked on, right? What the FAA needs is consistent, stable funding that, our national airspace is the most complex in the world, and it continues to expand with new entrants that in some cases will be much safer as we get into new types with advanced air mobility that Secretary Duffy spoke to, right? So we need an FAA, and you've got great people there. We need an FAA that's got the ability and the resources it needs to be able to take America into the next 50 years.
So one of the decisions that the president announced today, Chris Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran, of the FAA, now in charge of the agency. You know him very well. Do you commend the president on that decision?
Absolutely. It's a great decision. Chris, when I joined the FAA, was my number 2. I think the world of him, and I think the president has made an excellent choice. I look to see the work that Elon is doing and that Doge is doing. We have an opportunity to think about, use this moment. Let's not let this tragic event go to waste. Let's take this as an opportunity to say, what are the other innovative things we can do? We got some brilliant people out there in America, right? And let's think about what we can apply, be it AI. How do we make our airspace more efficient? How do we make it better so that we don't get in the situation where you're thinking about?
So in making sure this is a moment that we can do something better, the president has talked about DEI today. As I understand the timing of all of this, back in 2014, the hiring requirement process changed. Then in 2020, there was the Air Traffic Controller Hiring Reform Act that basically flipped it back to what it was. $25 billion for airports and air traffic in the infrastructure bill in 2021. Money for 3,000 new air traffic controllers in 2024, which was signed into law. And then President Trump ends the DEI policies at the FAA in one of the first actions that he does as president. Really, it was government-wide, but of course relates to the FAA. If this is a moment to look at where we can do things better, is the president onto something? Is he right to bring up this issue when it comes to this chess game in the skies and making sure that the best and brightest are in our air traffic control rooms?
What I can tell you is that I've traveled the world, and I'll tell you once again that everyone who has sit in the administrator's chair understands the weight and gravity of the office, understand that America has the most complex airspace anywhere in the world. Last year, the FAA, on a daily basis, you got nearly 50,000 flights. In 2022, when I joined the agency, there were 72 space launches. Last year, there were 148.
Wow.
We have 1 million drones. 500,000 of which are commercial operations.
We cover them often here on NewsNation.
Absolutely. So as you look at as the complexity grows, and we've got new entrants that will be safer, and all of this means that our technology needs to keep pace at a government level. So I commend the president on wanting to move us forward. And I hope that vis-a-vis Elon and some really bright minds, we can work at this. America, if we are to be the best, then we should have the best, most advanced FAA than anywhere else in the world.
I got to leave it there. Billy Nolan was the FAA administrator in the prior administration. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Very nice to have you in.
Appreciate it.
Still to come here on the Hill tonight. Have you ever flown into DCA? Ever been to that airport? It is one of the main airports here in Washington. And prior to this crash, it had become a point of contention in Congress. I'm going to explain to you on the other side of the break why that was the case and how it divided lawmakers at the time. Plus, a series of confirmation hearings got a little feisty today up on Capitol Hill. Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., all before the Senate. What happened there? I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill. Thanks for being with us tonight. We're back in 4 minutes.
It is a problem waiting to happen, and I've described this accident in the last 2 weeks as a flashing red warning signal to Congress that please do not add more flights. Don't jam more flights into this busiest runway in the United States.
And the inclusion of 5 round-trip flights is a modest proposal that will bring down consumer prices for flyers in the D.C. region and from western states. This modest increase will not result in negative impacts or delays.
All right, welcome back. That was just some of the debate last year here in Washington involving Ronald Reagan National Airport. More flights were added as a result of the FAA authorization bill. But this has been a contentious issue as the airport was originally designed to handle, give or take, some 15 million passengers a year. That right now, or at least the latest numbers in 2023, just north of 25 million passengers. Joining me now, Mick Mulvaney, NewsNation contributor, former White House chief of staff in the Trump administration, and Linda Tran, who knows more about infrastructure than anyone I know, former advisor to the transportation secretary.
Hello, Barb.
Hello, Buttigieg. Hello. So I want to walk folks through the flight pattern of these two last night, and just to sort of explain how all that happened. So pull that up. So this is looking south to north. We are basically standing right here right now. So you had the flight coming this way, the helicopter coming that way, and as it zooms out, you have Reagan here, Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, okay? You can see the Washington Monument, right? And this is one way to sort of show you how close this all is. I mean, I could take off my microphone right now and be at Reagan probably in 7 or 8 minutes. It's that close, all right? Now let me show you the other airports in this region, right? So we have DCA. It's in Virginia physically, but we have another one in Virginia. That's Dulles. That's 23 miles away. You can go out to BWI. That's in Baltimore, 26 miles away. Basically, these are 40-minute drives or so, give or take 30, 40 minutes in. But again, Reagan in the heart of this area here. And so one of the conversations here, Linda, last year was about adding more traffic, basically, to Reagan and whether or not it can handle it.
Yeah, and this is actually a pretty long-standing discussion. I can tell you that I probably heard from the airlines more than any other private stakeholder during the time that I was there. And it's always about DC slots, exactly.
Why?
So ultimately, as you pointed out, the airport was built for far less traffic than it has taken on over the last couple of years. And what the airlines were doing is they were arguing for their stake in a new slot. There's also a part of the slots and perimeter rule where there is a rule that you cannot have a nonstop flight that is further than 1,250 miles from DCA.
Okay.
So there's a lot of turn that's happening. If you want to put it into real context, you're looking at that one main runway, runway 19. 6,869 feet long, which is short by today's standards. And that runway has every minute and a half a plane landing.
So explain that perimeter rule to me, because there's members that you're a former member of Congress, members of Congress who want, for one of the many reasons, who want more flights out of there so they can get home quicker.
Especially the folks west of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., I think, is unique in the country in that it is limited by law into where you can fly. Back when Dulles was built in the 1960s, in order to protect Dulles and give Dulles the longer flights, they said, look, if you're going to fly international, you can't fly more than, as Linda points out, 1,250 miles, called the perimeter rule. So if you live further than 1,250 miles from Washington, D.C., by law, you're not allowed to take advantage of Washington National Airport, and a lot of folks don't like that.
By the way, I should point out, we have no idea still what happened last night. What was the result of this?
Correct.
How this may or may not have been caused. But I got a feeling the conversation on this airport's only going to pick up.
Absolutely.
Because of this.
Absolutely. And one thing to think about from an infrastructure perspective is that while it might not seem like that big of a deal, many planes have landed safely here over the many years that DCA has existed. What it does hinder is some of these infrastructure solutions that we have implemented in the past several years at other airports that have much more square footage. Things like end-around taxiways that allow planes to turn around safely so they're not crossing the runway at the same time as other planes, these near-miss type incidents that we've heard a lot about.
You still have lawmakers who want to keep this thing up and running as big as possible. John McCain, the late John McCain, refused to fly nonstop between Washington and Phoenix for years. Here's why. McCain's refusal to take the nonstop was his way of stubbornly sticking to a vow he made in response to criticism that he wanted the flights only so he could shorten his commute.
Yeah, again, I think the fact that if we're focusing on the airspace around DCA as a cause of this accident, I think that's really getting ahead of things.
Okay.
And every time we looked at the airport when I was in the administration, it was the infrastructure on the ground that was really the limiting factor, more than limiting infrastructure in the air. But that's another story. You could also talk about the fact that the technology they're using in the FAA is from the 1980s. Yeah. We're not making that up. In fact, cross country, we still follow the same routes that Charles Lindbergh laid laid out in the 1920s, not making that up.
That was fascinating from Billy Nolan about the technology. Like, this is the moment to sort of look at technology going forward.
Democrats and Republicans alike have been pushing what's called next-gen transportation for 10 years now, so we can use things like satellite navigation. You get better technology in your car than you do in an airplane sometimes.
Yeah, one way to think about it is these air traffic control towers are 40 to 60 years old. They're old. What do you think the inside looks like?
Well, got to leave it there. Nick, Linda, thank you very much. Still to come here on the Hill, we speak to a former Army helicopter pilot about the tragic crash over the Potomac last night. What, in his view, what does he think happened? Plus, does Kash Patel have an enemies list? Does Tulsi Gabbard think Edward Snowden is a traitor? What was said during their confirmation hearings today? When we return. It is almost 6:30 here in Washington, D.C. The sun is set in our nation's capital and over the Potomac River. Tonight, the United States mourning the 67 lives presumed to be lost in last night's deadly midair collision near Ronald Reagan National Airport. Recovery efforts continue 22 hours after the crash and likely will for quite some time. Here's what we know at this moment. At least 28 bodies have been recovered. Some of the passengers on the American Airlines flight were young figure skaters and coaches returning from the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. The 1994 world champion Russian figure skaters were also among those on the plane. According to the Wichita Eagle, there was also a 20-year-old Grace Maxwell, a Wichita native, who was on her way back to college after attending her grandfather's funeral, a vigil held in Wichita today. These are just a few of the victims, but officials believe there are no survivors. Flights are operating again out of DCA. The government has set up a family crisis center down the road in Bethesda, Maryland, for the families involved. President Trump earlier today held a moment of silence at the White House for the victims.
This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly. And we are a country of, really, we are in mourning.
Just a couple miles from the unimaginable, the confirmation process for the president's cabinet continued, by the way. But the president also had his eyes on this. Tulsi Gabbard, the president's pick for director of national intelligence, spent hours answering questions about her meeting with the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and her views on the whistleblower Edward Snowden.
Is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America? That is not a hard question to answer when the stakes are this high.
Senator, as someone who has
your
served
answer,
in
yes
uniform,
or no, is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
As someone who has worn our uniform in combat, I understand how critical our national security is.
Apparently you don't.
Kash Patel, the president's nominee to lead the FBI, also coming under question. Senator Tom Tillis got several bingos, as he put it, during today's hearing.
Colleagues, I created a Kash bingo card that I have available to any of my colleagues that would like it on the other side of the aisle.
Is Bill Barr on your list of whatever you want to call them, been referred to as an enemies list?
Well, it's not whatever we want to call it, Senator. With all due respect, it's not an enemies list. That is a total mischaracterization.
But we continue our coverage here on NewsNation with the tragedy at DCA just down the road from us in the Potomac River. Congressman Rich McCormick is a Republican from Georgia. He is also a helicopter pilot from the Marine Corps. Congressman, I thank you for being with us tonight. Every time I talk to you, you end the conversation by saying Semper Fi. And I presume you'll do so tonight. And I wonder, Congressman, as a proud helicopter pilot, when you saw the images, when you heard the news, what went through your mind last night?
Well, first of all, it gives you flashbacks. There's not anybody who serves in the military aviation community who doesn't know somebody who's died. It's a very dangerous profession we do. You can't get individual insurance from civilians. I mean, you can't. It's that dangerous. What we do is basically hope that we never make a mistake that will cost people their lives. This was in my opinion, after talking to my chief, who is an Army pilot and who also is an airline pilot for American Airlines, who's flown into DCA multiple times, just talking about what could have happened to have prevented this, because probably when you have mishaps like this, there's a chain of events. And when I went to aviation school in Monterey, you talk about all the things that had to happen for this to have taken place, because there are multiple fail-safes, whether it be both sets of pilots, crew chief looking out the window, NVGs, air traffic control. So many things had to happen for this to have lined up perfectly for this horrible tragedy to take place. Really hurts my heart. In my opinion, if you're looking for an opinion, what happened, you had air crew both thought that they saw the other. The Army pilots acknowledged that they saw the aircraft. I think they were looking at somebody else because they were lined up for runway 33 instead of 01. That the fail-safe avoidance system on the commercial airline had been turned off because they're below 500 feet. And because they're in a left bank, they couldn't see the other aircraft. And because of the night vision goggles being washed out by the lights, I think it just perfect alignment for a bad thing to happen. ATC, you heard, says, do you have visual? And they requested visual separation. Obviously, nobody understood what everybody else was looking at, and that's what created the mishap.
As a member of Congress, I also believe you're on the Armed Services Committee, sir. In this being a Black Hawk helicopter, what do you believe is incumbent upon the Pentagon now and in the upcoming days?
Well, first of all, we can't jump to any conclusions. This is going to be investigated for a long time, for months. It's going to be frustrating because people, by the time this actually comes to fruition, people have moved on to some other news. But this is a painstaking thing, trying to piece together the black box information, the comms, the video, everything we had, just to make sure we understand what really took place. The instructor pilots and the captain airline were both experienced pilots. The ATC people in DCA are some of the best. Atlanta and DCA have some of the best because they're the high volume traffic that they have. So a lot of really good people made some mistakes to make this happen. So we don't want to jump to conclusions. We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction that downs aircraft, but we want to make a good decision in the future so this doesn't happen again.
Let me ask you before we head out. The FAA Reauthorization Act, Congressman, was $105 billion over 4 years, and there's going to be lots of conversations about air traffic control and the FAA. Do you believe that the FAA has what it needs?
There's always room for improvement. We should always review and make sure that especially when things like this happen, that we're doing things by the book. In this case, I don't see anything that was egregious other than we can maybe get rid of some of the things that cause misunderstanding and make sure we correct whatever that scenario is. But I don't know how money is going to solve this problem. This is something that happens every once in a while in our community, and it's horrible. But before we start pointing fingers, we need to make sure we understand all the facts.
We'll leave it there. Congressman Rich McCormick, a pilot in the Marine Corps, Republican from Georgia, once again live with us here on the Hill. Thank you, Congressman.
Semper Fi.
Told you he would. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. There are questions tonight surrounding the Black Hawk helicopter involved in last night's incident. American Airlines Flight 5342 and the Army helicopter flew directly into each other. Now, video here, you've seen this time and again, shows them coming head on. Among the many questions, what is it like to fly in that area? It is among the busiest airspace in this country. Brant Anderson is a former Chinook helicopter pilot, also worked on Black Hawk helicopters, joins me live here on the Hill. You flew in that area for President Obama's inauguration. Describe that for me, being in a helicopter in that airspace.
Yeah, Blake, it is so busy. There's so many airplanes coming in and out of DCA, a lot of other aircraft, helicopters flying in. You have local police department, you have the Coast Guard, and plus with military aircraft, so it's incredibly congested. The radios are also very, very busy. As the congressman was just describing, ATC and how we navigate this busy airspace has to be something we look at, because there simply isn't the time or the bandwidth to make long, extended radio calls giving everyone precise instructions.
But do you say scrap the training there? Like, that would be sort of one knee-jerk reaction, wouldn't it?
No, yeah, I think you have to train. Military trains where you fight. So you can't just take an air crew out to the middle of a field someplace. They have to train in the real world where those guys are expected to operate. And so this air crew, they operate in and around the D.C. area. They need to be training in the D.C. area. They're flying under daytime, nighttime, so I think it's appropriate that they were training in those same conditions.
To the other side of that, though, we're learning that the pilot had 1,000 hours of experience, the co-pilot, these are give or take 500 hours. Where Where is that, and is that enough to be operating in this area?
Sure. So 1,000 hours, I would say, is middle of the road for most Army air crews. I'll say 1,000 is what you'll find of folks who are really getting into their instructor pilot tracks. Maybe they're starting to specialize. This instructor is accomplished, because sometimes if you can have a lot of time, but if your time isn't current or you've been sitting out for a while, that may not always make you more safe in the aircraft. So those 1,000 hours are probably recent. They're hours in and around this area. They might be hours overseas. So those are quality hours that person has. 500 hours is certainly on the more junior side. Those are someone who's still learning. It's why they were probably flying with an instructor pilot. And certainly that crew mix is something that the investigators will look at as they begin.
Brant Anderson, got to leave it there. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being with us
tonight
Blake. Here on the Hill. Appreciate it. Among the victims of the deadly collision is Officer Sam Lilly. His father, Tim Lilly, confirmed his son was on board the commercial flight that crashed. And our Chris Cuomo spoke with him earlier today.
How are you making this make sense, that someone in the prime of their lives doing everything right is now gone?
It doesn't make sense. The only thing, Sam's right with Jesus, and I know where he's going, and I just love that kid, and I'm sorry.
You can only imagine. You can watch the full interview tonight on Cuomo here on NewsNation. That's 8 o'clock Eastern, an hour and a half from now. Still to come here on the Hill, the latest updates as we know them over the Potomac River with the crash at Reagan National Airport. Plus, the president and his reaction today as his top confirmation picks testified up on Capitol Hill. Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard. How did that happen? How did that go down? Full panel, other side.
My administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses.
President Trump earlier today briefing reporters about last night's deadly collision over the Potomac River, saying change will come at the FAA, focusing on merits and not DEI. Now, officials have yet to give an official cause for the crash. The investigation is not even 24 hours old at this point. But the New York Times reports tonight the air traffic control tower staffing was, quote, not normal at the time of the crash. Later in the day, while signing executive orders, the president also shared some new details on the tariffs that he plans to impose on Canada and Mexico. The president saying that's coming within the next 48 hours.
The tariff of 25% on Canada and separately 25% on Mexico. And we will really have to do that because we have very big deficits with those countries. Those tariffs may or may not rise with time.
Full panel. Here with me now, Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff in the Trump administration, NewsNation contributor. Linda Tran, former senior advisor to the transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. And Niall Stanage, White House columnist for The Hill as well. Hello to you all. Hello. Thanks for being here. Nice to have both of you back. Mick, you said something on the show last night that caught my attention.
Yeah.
You said the difference between Trump...
One thing? Is that what you're saying?
The difference between Trump 2.0 and 1.0 is the president is willing to push harder now. And I witnessed today, after this horrible scene last night, just a couple miles down the road, the president going out before the cameras, making comments, taking a stance on DEI, and then 3 hours later is back in the Oval Office, signing executive orders, taking questions from reporters, and making news on tariffs.
The flood the zone thing is real. There's no question that Trump learned how to do this is real. I don't like the implication here 24 hours after the crash, the DEI had anything to do with it. OK, but listen to what he just said. I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you're from. I want the best people. This is what got him elected, and he's going to ride this as long as he possibly can. And it's not just going to be at the FAA. It's going to be on everything. But the flood the zone concept is real. I don't know how long they can keep it up because I think they've run out of...
So you're his former chief of staff. How long do they keep going down this path?
I mean, they've done more, I think, in the first 2 weeks. I think they've done more executive actions in the first 2 weeks than we may have done in the first 4 years. I know it was more than we did in the first year. I don't know how long you maintain that.
It's a lot. And there's definitely a lesson to be learned from all of this from my party, which is they are flooding the zone, and you can't jump at everything. So you have to decide what are the key issues that you're going to push back on. Obviously, we saw Democrats coalescing around pushing back on funding freezes and making the case about the impact on ordinary, everyday Americans.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Flood the zone with what? That's the question. When it comes to the DEI issue, he's flooding the zone with a claim that there's this language on the FAA's website that has been there since 2013 and has been there throughout the first Trump administration. And he is sort of whipping it up into an outrage when in fact it has been there for a long time. And the FAA have previously said, yes, we try to recruit from as diverse a source as possible, but everyone has to meet the requirements.
So the process, though, to get air traffic controllers did change, and then they reversed it back with a law in 2019 that was actually signed into law in 2020. I think that's sort of what the president was hinting at now, with also saying, look, he did get rid of those DEI initiatives government-wide, which would include the FAA.
I mean, I think, is it not just more the fact that he has decided that DEI is a useful and politically useful argument to make about almost everything? We could have that argument about where it gets excessive, where it is a useful corrective to historical injustices and all of that. But his point is the labeling of everything bad as DEI-oriented works for him politically. I think it does. I just think it's often factually wrong.
The news on tariffs, Julia, is a big one. It came sort of out of left field. The president was asked about it. He answered. And now over the next 48 hours, we have to wait and see what he does here.
Right. And I mean, it comes after last week when we had, or weekend, when we had that, I guess you could call it a scare, a potential scare with Colombia, potential tariffs there. Look, I think there's a real question of what impact is this going to have on the economy. Democrats, the president's critics, say that this would raise prices on, U.S. consumers. So I think that's a real concern. But I want to go back to flooding the zone. I mean, Donald Trump can, do these executive actions, executive orders. He can keep doing it. But at some point, he's going to have to work with Congress. And I think that's a point where Republicans are really worried right now. They came back from Doral, Florida, with really not much of a blueprint, not much of a plan. They want to get that big, beautiful bill by April 20th, by Easter. It doesn't seem like there's much of a plan there.
Meantime, live look, Capitol Hill, where more of the president's cabinet nominees testified before the Senate today. Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. answering questions about why they believe they are the ones that should be serving in the Trump administration. Lawmakers raised several questions, though, about Gabbard, for example. Trump's pick to be the director of national intelligence, about her meeting with Bashar al-Assad.
I have no love for Assad or Gaddafi or any dictator.
And when Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, you didn't condemn him. I can go through all the quotes. You actually questioned Americans' intelligence.
Kash Patel, the president's pick to lead the FBI, asked about who won the 2020 election.
Can you say the words, Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Joe Biden was the president of the United States.
I'm going to stay on this. There's a difference. I can say the words, Donald Trump won. I don't like to say it, but I must say it. And you cannot say that Joe Biden won the election.
What I can say is the same for both of them, Senator. Both of their elections were certified.
You had at one point Tom Tillis holding up a Kash Patel bingo card, basically trying to make the point that Democrats are going to try to hit all these things. Look, I think the bottom line here is Kash Patel is getting in. Most likely he's going to be the next FBI director. The question is Tulsi Gabbard, Mick, and whether she is the director of national intelligence. What are the betting odds there for you? Where do you think
I think you're spot on with Kash Patel. I think of the three, that's the most important to President Trump. After that, I think the most important is probably Tulsi Gabbard. I just do. I know that Robert F. Kennedy is popular with certain wings of the MAGA. I get that. But his relationship with the president was transactional at best. I mean, it was, drop out of the race, endorse me, and I'll nominate you for the cabinet secretary. Look, they told us back in 2017, we'll nominate you, but you were on your own. And certainly that message has to go out to Bobby Kennedy. So I think of the three, if the most likely to go down would probably be Kennedy because Trump just isn't as tight with him as he is with the other two.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. On the spectrum, I think Kash Patel is on his way in, and that made for great popcorn and entertainment, but he's on his way in. Tulsi Gabbard, I think, really has to contend with Susan Collins, who has made very clear publicly that she is not convinced and she's not enthused.
And she won't be convinced by Trump either.
And then you've got Bill Cassidy is the biggest problem for
RFK Jr.
For RFK Jr.
Short version is Tulsi Gabbard, unlike the others, is different from the broad Republican worldview on foreign policy in a lot of ways. Bashar al-Assad, anti-interventionist, all of that. That's what puts her in danger. It is easier to peel off Republicans from her than it is from the other nominees.
Does that add any Democrats, though?
I don't necessarily think it. I don't think it does. I don't see Democrats voting for her.
I mean, look, I think I agree with what everyone has said. Susan Collins did say that she did like Tulsi Gabbard's answers. One person to watch, James Langford, he didn't seem very thrilled with her refusing to call or not calling Edward Snowden a traitor.
And they've known each other a long time. We all served together. I think we all came in. She came in 12. I came in with James Langford in 10. So they've known each other for more than a decade.
And here they are, more than a decade later, and still questions about how it all ends. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Still to come, other side of the break. Leland Vitter, live once again from the Potomac, just on the other side of the river. What he is seeing tonight and what he witnessed himself last night when we return. A report out in the Washington Post just moments ago, the headline from the Post. The day before the crash, a jet in D.C. had to abort landing due to helicopter. There are also reports tonight that the black boxes potentially have been recovered by crews there on the scene. Welcome back to The Hill on NewsNation. I'm Blake Berman. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, getting ready. About to hand it over to him. Leland, you're in a familiar site you know very well. It seems like we are about to get some more information and some more answers on what went wrong.
Lots always. It's always more than one thing.
Yes.
When you have something like this. The other thing, Blake, I think to point out, there's now going to be a lot of questions, and there should be in pressure, over just how busy Reagan Airport has been allowed to become. Over the past couple of years, the numbers of go-arounds have increased radically.